What is good, everybody? It's Carson Craning back at it again with another YouTube video. And today I want to take you through my personal best or favorite albums of 2024. 2024 was an insane year for music, and I kind of wanted to end this great year of music out with giving what my personal favorites were. Because there were so many great albums this year, what I wanted to do is create a two-tiered system of ranking the albums. The first tier are what I consider to be great albums. These are albums that I thoroughly enjoy, and while they were really great and I want to bring attention to them in this video, they weren't my personal favorite. My personal favorites are reserved for the second section, which is what I think the best albums of the year are, or my 15 top records of the year. This is how we're ranking the music. It's either in the great category or the best category. Within those sections, none of the records are ranked. I generally don't like ranking music against each other, especially when the music comes from different genres. Okay, enough of the rules. Let's just get into it with the first section, these being great records. The first record I want to talk about is Para No Olvidar by Clamor. Clamor is a Buenos Aires hardcore emo band, and if you've never heard of them before, it's because this is their debut album. They're in the sort of world of emo-core or hardcore that's very, very influenced by Title Fight, in the sort of way where it is, yes, gritty and aggressive, but at the same time sort of blissful, energetic, youthful, and fun. This whole record sort of has that feel of when you're just getting out of school on summer break, and you're like throwing a slushie at someone you don't like. 13-inch Italian Stilettos by Shoo Shoo. Shoo Shoo is the project of Jamie Stewart, and they have spent the last 20 years making some very avant-garde experimental art rock. And this record, 13-inch Italian Stilettos, is Shoo Shoo at its maybe least experimental and most consumable or poppy. While there are certainly a lot of polarizing or bizarre moments on this record, this is certainly the record that would be easiest to recommend to a friend. And this whole record just sort of feels like you are receiving brain surgery in a children's television show about wacky puppets. Boy by 2 Hollis. It could be said that 2024 was the year of white boy rap, with the likes of Ian, Joeyy, Nettspend, Brennan Jones. But among this awkward wave of white boy rappers, one of them stands out having more artistic integrity, and I think that's 2 Hollis. He's inspired by the likes of Bladee, Salem, and the Help, and so unlike most of his peers, he's actually not really biting a sound as much as creating his own. And because of his own creative production, he's been able to sort of pave his own way in this field. Wrong Weakness by Fievel is Glaku. Fievel is Glaku is an art pop jazz band, and the name roughly translates to Five-O is creepy, Five-O being the character from American Tail, which I can conclude is indeed very creepy. But there is really nothing on this record that is creepy at all. In fact, this record is quite lovely. This album just sort of feels like it is a spring day in Paris. It's just starting to get warm. You have just bought a fresh bouquet of flowers because you're about to go on a first date. And everything is just warm, fresh, and beautiful. The album is just charming, lighthearted, and a fun, upbeat, good vibe. Artificial Bouquet by Frail Body. Frail Body is a post-hardcore scramz emo violence band from Rockford, Illinois. And what I love about Frail Body is they're really able to master this sort of tension and balance between these more tender, beautiful guitar riffs and these hardcore, noisy, classic sort of scramz moments. There's a certain nautical quality to this record, which makes it feel like it would be a great soundtrack to a pirate movie. And the pirate is sort of in between these moments of longing for his bride who awaits at shore, but is also constantly being confronted and thrown into these bloody sea pirate battles. Mosaic by Fenez. This is an ambient, glitchy, electronic drone record, and it's the perfect ambient record for maybe like floating in a sensory deprivation tank. Ambient projects don't usually get a lot of love on lists like this, but if you do like ambient music, the best way I can describe it is that you're floating in the water, but the water is sort of digital and glitchy, almost like pop rocks when they're in your mouth. The Great Bailout by More Mother. More Mother is often labeled as avant-garde, as it's spoken word poetry over these walls of harsh electronic noise and sound collage. So with all that being said, this album is not going to be for everybody, but if this does sound for you, like it could be for you, I'd 100% recommend it. This album sounds like London has fallen, and the British Museum lays decrepit and flooded. And More Mother is your sort of guide through this flooded British Museum, where she brings you through room to room and guides you on a boat like Charon in the River of Styx through this museum, and gives you these apocalyptic descriptions of the artifacts that remain. The Healer by Sumac. Sumac is a Washington-based sludge, drone, black metal album. And if any of those genres appeal to you, or if the likes of Boris or Sun are sort of your thing, this is gonna be the album for you. The songs are devastatingly long, oftentimes being 25 minutes. This album sounds like it would be the soundtrack for a movie where a biker gang came across a psyched out cult in the woods of Oregon, and they for some reason had a confrontation and had to have this epic fight where these bikers end up beating the living shit out of these crazy psyched out cult members. This album is wicked, it's badass, and if you like heavy rock music, definitely check this one out. Rewired by Kuru. Rewired by Kuru is a really cool and original mix of cloud rap, hyperpop, digicore, all genres that usually feel like they've sort of been oversaturated, but not with this Kuru project. It feels very original, and like the Kuru is bringing something really new to the table. One thing that's missing with a lot of these sort of Gen Z acts in this sort of hyperpop digicore wave is this sense that like they grew up on Roblox and Twitch, and this album really has that sort of energy. This album sounds like it came out of a heavily modded Cyberpunk 2077, where someone has changed every NPC to the characters from either Serial Experiments of Lain or Neon Genesis. The Come Up by Smoke Dope 2016. Smoke Dope 2016 comes from the corner of rap and the internet that is inhabited by Joey and Shed Theory. And this corner of contemporary rap is heavily laced in parody and irony. But Smoke Dope, unlike the rest of his contemporaries, feels a little bit more authentic, committed, and like he actually cares about the output of his music. Like you can tell he cares about his craft. He cares about putting out a good album. It's cloud rap and tread, but with this sort of obsession with gamer nostalgia and 2016 aesthetics. Like this album is the perfect album to put on when you wanna replay Black Ops 2 or CSGO. The American Standard by Uniform, sludge rock, noise rock, and industrial rock outfit Uniform have released a terrifying album that sounds like the town drunk has been set loose in a paper processing mill and is trying to manically light the whole thing on fire in a drunken rage. The best way I can describe it is it sounds like the Jesus Lizard if they were hyped up on steroids. If you're a fan of heavier rock, especially sort of like Chat Pile, definitely go check this one out. The Crying Out of Things by The Body. The Body is known to be one of the loudest and most intense acts in metal today. They have seamlessly mixed industrial rock, drone metal, and power electronics to create these massive waves and walls of noise. Waves and walls probably aren't even the right word. They're more like the waves of a typhoon. This album sounds like some sort of twisted, forsaken prophecy where demigods have returned to wreak havoc on Earth. To reclaim it as their own, humans need to fight them using drone warfare. www. Christ. This album is really hard to describe. This album is a very internet take on post-industrial electronic, and it's sort of like if Portishead had been exposed to 4chan. There's some really heavily well done sampling, and while this album sounds sort of obscure and is really hard to describe, it's actually pretty easy to listen to. A Lonely Sinner by Sam LCR. This one is if Have a Nice Life or God You Speed Emperor was for furries. Folktronica mixed with shoegaze and post-rock. It's this very theatrical-like experience of an album. I think it's a concept album. Listening to this album sort of plays out like the Divine Comedy, where you're going through these different layers of heaven and hell, and it feels very ethereal, except the whole concept of this album and theme of it is about sheep. If you're into post-rock at all, this is the one for you. Evil Reflections by Glock 40 Spaz and Osama Sun. This is one of the best rap collab albums in the last few years. Osama Sun and Glock 40 Spaz are both underground rappers. However, even though they exist in sort of similar spheres, their sounds are very different, with Osama Sun being this very melodic, heavily auto-tuned flow, and Glock 40 Spaz having this much more distinct and aggressive, choppy almost flow. And while these very different takes and flows might seem like they would really not mesh well at first, what it ends up doing on this project is actually complementing each other really, really well. It reminds me a lot of What a Time to Be Alive by Future and Drake, where the different styles or flows of the rappers really play this sort of good cop, bad cop relationship, from their chemistry and how they play off of each other to the beat selection. This album is a banger and one I would definitely check out. To All the Trains by Shellac. This is the last record from the musical legend Steve Albini of Big Black and Shellac. And unfortunately, he passed away a few days before this album released. It's noisy, it's aggressive, it's somewhere between post-hardcore and math rock. The last track on this record is called I Don't Fear Hell, and I can't think of anything more badass than the last track of your career and life being named I Don't Fear Hell. Night Killers Volume 2 by Snow Strippers. Snow Strippers is really leading the charge, really bringing the whole indie sleaze electro clash scene to popularity. And instead of being a nod to more traditional electro clash, is sort of more in the hazy electronic spirit of a Spencer's Gifts. This album sounds like you're wearing weed socks, a snapback, and just watching 360 no-scope videos. The Death of an Angel by Falling with Scissors. This album sounds like you're being attacked by a vacuum, but I mean that in the best way possible. Exactly what the genre of this album is really still to be determined. It's somewhere between these ambient electronic elements, grindcore, breakcore, screamo, metalcore, noise, but the one thing that unites them is that they are all fast. That's the best way I could describe this album, is fast and chaotic. This album sounds like you're stuck in a TV and you are manically flipping from channel to channel because you are being chased by some sort of interdimensional villain. This album sounds like a very dark take on YouTube Shorts. I would definitely check it out. One honorable mention, because there is one album that exists in between those tiers, and it is Mount Eerie Night Palace. Let me just lay the cards on the table for you guys. I was making this video the night before, I was telling my homie about it, and bro mentioned this album, and I realized I had never listened to it. I listened to it last night, a place where I'm still processing it because I've only listened to it once, but it is really, really wonderful. Sort of guilty of being misinformed. Don't really know where to put this album yet. Probably would put it in the top 15, but I'm just not sure. Either way, go listen to this record. I listened to it once. I thought it was really beautiful. All right, enough of the great albums. Let's get it into the best albums. Again, these are unranked, but these are my top 15 best albums of 2024. Let's jump right in with one of the hardest hitting albums of this year, Cool World by Chatpile. Noise rock, sludge, metal band, Chatpile released one of the best albums in 2022. And now they have come back again and hit us with an even harder, even more nightmarish release than their 2022 album. Cool World is more sharper, it's more aggressive than their 2022 release. While God's Country was indeed a nightmarish, noisy, sludgy, grimy album, there was a sense in which this album had some moments that felt silly or heartwarming. And for Cool World, they've sort of abandoned those sensibilities in favor of a more jaded, violent, and upfront feeling. In the past, their music has felt like if your favorite bro had a really bad acid trip and you were trying to sort of comfort them through it, where in some places it was sort of funny and endearing, but you were also worried for bro. But now this album feels like your bro who had the bad acid trip has never really recovered from that acid trip, and it has completely altered their whole worldview. And now your bro who once had this little like warm light inside of them has now lost a very deep sense of self. What I'm trying to say is there is an element to this album that is devastating and despairing, which wasn't present in Chat Pile's previous work, and also isn't often paired so well with such a badass sound. What I love about this album is that it's able to be aggressive, noisy, and sludgy, but also balance that with a sort of devastation that only a few bands have been able to do. I'm thinking of like the likes of Nirvana, or like a Deftones. I think this is gonna stake its claim as one of the best noise rock albums of all time, and for sure, one of the best rock albums of the 2020s. This album sounds like what it must feel like to turn into a werewolf. Charm by Clairo. Charm is where we see Clairo brilliantly mixing soul with bedroom indie pop. Prior to this release, Clairo's music had always sort of been this melancholy, indie rock, but here we see Clairo and moving from this sort of melancholy feel to these upbeat, sort of rich pop instrumentals that are super influenced by soul music. The instrumentation on this album is gorgeous. The way this album is mixed and sort of has this grainy analog feel like a lot of old soul records. Just so much care and creativity went into creating this album. Clairo is a lot more naturally attuned to these sort of soul, rich, upbeat tracks than I think she ever has previously in her career. And it would be like the perfect album to listen to if you were cruising Venice on one of those big wood classic boats. May It Never Falter by Glaive. Glaive has been one of the leaders of the hyperpop scene, dubbed the hyperpop king. And it's really interesting to see as hyperpop has evolved and changed, to also see Glaive starting to evolve his sound in very interesting ways. This year, I've really been liking to hear how his sound and style is progressing. Especially with the EP, he started the year off on a bit of a mad one. Way more introspective, clever, mature songwriting, with being a lot more poetic and heartfelt, but also pairing it with these really richer, more interesting, chaotic electronic instrumentals, and continue to develop it even further on May It Never Falter. This makes me just really curious to see how his style will continue to mature and evolve, because I've really liked his songwriting and his lyrical ability as it's developed. May It Never Falter sort of seems like this kid from suburban America who has somehow ended up at a really harsh electronic rave. There's a sense of it where the lyricism feels very warm, youthful, but also cleverly introspective, but the instrumentations feel harsh and electronic. The Thief Next to Jesus by Ka. Ka is one of the greatest rappers of all time. His work very much being in the vein of a MF Doom, Billy Woods, or like an Earl Sweatshirt. Unfortunately, this was Ka's last project, as he passed away shortly after releasing it. The Thief Next to Jesus is where Ka explores his relationship to Christianity, the positive and the negatives of it. In some senses, Ka is very much jaded by the concept of the church in America, especially in relation to how it's treated Black Americans. But in another sense, he is liberated by it. Ka's reflection on spirituality and the institution of the church itself is really interesting, and I think a really beautiful, fitting, poetic note to the last part of Ka's career. Drumless, lush, classic hip-hop instrumentals, a lot of soul and jazz samples. And if you've never listened to Ka before, I would definitely check this one out. Really great rapper. LL by The hellp. The hellp are an electro-clash indie sleaze act who have spent the last few years paving the way for the indie sleaze scene to take off, even though they themselves hate that label. And in many ways, this new sound for this major label debut is way different than their previous sounds. In the past, The hellp's work has been much more experimental. There was sort of this neurotic and schizophrenic sense to their music, where it would have these howled vocals that sometimes sounded like they were inspired by Shoo Shoo, and other times they had this sort of country twang to them, with subject matters ranging from Immanuel Kant, Chrome Hearts and Nick Land over these grimy electronic beats. On this new record, for their major label debut, they've become a lot more polished and consumable. Replace their manic vocals with a more polished, catchy hooks, and they've really leaned into these pop sensibilities. A lot of the hooks and melodies sort of remind me of Pinback or Blink-182, but the one thing that really remains from their original style of music are those grimy electronic synths. The instrumentals and electronics on this album have a great and amazing texture. What I think the hellp are best at is songwriting and how to develop an interesting, nuancedly structured song. Foxing, self-titled. Foxing is a Midwest emo band whose 2014 record at the Albatross was one of the defining Midwest emo albums of the 2010s. And now 10 years later, Foxing has released an album that is nothing like that record. They have done a completely 180 to a different sound at this point in their career. And I think that is the best thing possible. This new self-titled release from Foxing really isn't Midwest emo at all, but instead a mix of post-hardcore, noise pop, and experimental rock. All of their previous work you could probably describe as a bit slow or melancholic, while this is extremely loud, fast, chaotic, and in your face. This album sounds like you're going through a car crash and at the same time your life is flashing before your eyes. This album sounds like getting tased for indecent exposure at Chili's. This album sounds like you accidentally took the wrong pill at Disneyland. This album sounds like a deeply unsettling vision that comes to you in between cheap watered down margaritas. Go give this a listen. It's super, super unique and super, super fun. Pinball by Mike. Mike, for Pinball, has sort of set aside this artsy, experimental style of rap that he's been known for and swapped it for a more contemporary take on cloud rap. One of the things that I love about this project is that Mike is not trying to take himself too seriously on it, but he is taking his craftsmanship seriously. Just because he's not being super artistic or abstract doesn't mean he doesn't have bars. It's pretty evident that he spent a lot of time recently around the likes of Evil Gianni and Real Young Phil. The album overall sort of sounds reminiscent of Lucky, but if Lucky went off lean and started taking care of himself more, like going to therapy, shopping at Whole Foods, going to the gym, that is what this album sounds like. Because Mike is not only able to master a totally different sound of hip-hop, but also a totally different discipline and philosophy to writing music. February self-titled album. Scramz or screamo is back in full swing on TikTok, with Gen Z starting to really take hold of the genre and make it their own. Tracks titled Markiplier Saved My Life to Kill Yourself If You Have Tinder. February really wears their upbringing on their sleeve, but that doesn't mean that this music is overly silly, because this band has released a really solid selection of tracks. They're really able to go well back and forth from the beautiful mathy guitar riffs to the more intense, screamed, aggressive moments on this record, where they're sort of able to give off this feeling of nostalgia for what you grew up with, somehow also feeling jaded about that reality as well. You can really feel there's intense grapple with the vibe around, am I grateful for the times I had, or am I still really deeply jaded by them? It's almost like having a toxic relationship with your own memory. The best way I can describe this record is this album feels like October of 2013. You just got home from school and you're trying to make a decision on whether you should watch some PewDiePie videos on YouTube or go hang out with your friends and play in the fall leaves. And then all of a sudden your mom comes into your room to let you know that you are moving and your parents are also getting a divorce. Vita Blue by Mama Leak. Mama Leak is one of the most intensely strange, avant-garde, black metal, jazz fusion bands. Really weird combination, but they make some of the most original music you've ever heard. And when a lot of bands are experimental, sometimes it doesn't feel cohesive. Sometimes it feels like they're being experimental just for the sake of being experimental, but they're not really able to establish a vibe or a theme. Mama Leak is able to be experimental, but really establish a vibe or a theme. I think what Mama Leak does best is they're able to capture a feeling that everyone has, but really aren't able to often put out in music. And I think the vibe that Mama Lee captures is this sort of haunted feeling, like a deep, soulful haunting. Black metal jazz fusion is really weird, but the result of it is that it sort of feels like a haunted bar in New Orleans. This is maybe the most haunted feeling Southern Gothic album I think out there. While the whole like feeling or vibe of just listening to this album is this very Gothic haunted blues, the lyrics are even more cryptic and strange. The lead singer mentions everything from industrial processes, ancient altars, to biotech. This album is sort of the musical definition of surrealism to me. It's sort of a Lynchian theater. This album sounds like you're going through a haunted forest in the deep south and the trees are just screaming at you. Thou Umbilical. If you like sludge or doom metal, Thou's Umbilical is going to be the album of the year for you. This album rips through you like a chainsaw. Album sounds like the spirit of rage has come down and embodied the flesh to wreak havoc on whoever has heard it. What makes Thou a little bit different and unique compared to other sludge or doom metal acts is that the vocals are screamed in a really guttural, aggressive way that gives the music a much different feel or energy. This is one of the most intense or badass projects of the year. This album feels like you have been hunting the Minotaur and you just shoot it right between the eyes. This album feels like you're throwing flaming skulls at your enemies. This album feels like the creature chained to the bottom of the lake. Brat by Charlie XCX. It's impossible not to talk about 2024 and music without talking about Brat. This album has become massive in a way that albums don't normally become so massive. Single bodies of music are not usually this influential. And I think the reason that this has become so big is because of how good the music is. Just talking about this album sort of feels like I'm beating a dead horse. It's an excellent album. I don't think I really need to tell you any more than that. Mach, Rich Haitian. Mach is one of the greatest yet most mysterious rappers of the past 10 years. Most known for his legendary run in 2017 where he released a series of amazing albums, one after the other, all in 1 year, including his magnum opus, The Gat. Mach is a lyrical genius on a completely other level, being that he is a polyglot or someone who has mastered multiple languages. However, you might not realize how great his lyrics are because he refuses to allow them to even be put on the internet. Mach is very elusive and sort of gatekeepy. He hides his face. He doesn't allow his lyrics to be published on the internet. Hell, you can't even stream or buy most of his albums unless you want to pay upwards of thousands of dollars for them. This has made Mach a really unique and uncompromising character in hip-hop. And Rich Haitian is a completely new energy or vibe for Mach's music. Mach feels really hungry on this record. And while in the past he is sort of stuck to a more jazz rap, abstract style of rap, here he's going in for a slightly more contemporary feel. There's a certain type of punchiness to his production where this album is mastered a lot better than some of his previous releases. And Mach's lyrical performance is him at his best. He's really hungry. His bars are hilarious, devastating, and really capture you throughout this project. Mach is really clever at setting up punchlines, having elite wordplay, and delivering these super funny one-liners. What can I say besides bro was really hungry when he made this project and it shows. This album is phenomenal. 2-star in The Dream Police by mk.gee. This record is one of the most important and groundbreaking indie alternative records in the past 10 years. And it's going to sort of really bring a completely new sound or philosophy of making music to the genre. And since it's come out, it's already really blown up and made mk.gee one of the most popular names in alternative music. 2-star at The Dream Police is pretty much an album just stacked full of 80s sounding pop ballads. And while the song structure is really reminiscent of those pop ballads, what makes it unique is the instrumentation in terms of vibe, mixing, and the sound experimentation that mk.gee has. I've never really heard a guitar sound like this before. And that's because mk.gee got really creative with his hardware and ran his guitar through a tape machine. So when he plays his guitar softly, it has this really unique warm, hollow tone to it and sort of strikes it in a more aggressive manner. The guitar makes this metal scraping sound, which almost reminds me of Steve Albini's guitar in Big Black. It kind of sounds like an electrical cable where he goes from this really unique warm tone to these harsh metallic scraping cable-like sound. And he really is able to master the production to make the rest of the music really complement that. When he kind of has this more scraping, there are a cacophony of other noises that sort of cough and bark at you to kind of continue the creative energy of this album. This album sort of sounds like you're in a really dense fog, and then all of a sudden a crow calling really startles you. Cold Visions by bladee. Bladee is the underground Swedish rap star who has had a long career being a tastemaker in cloud and tread rap. And at this point of the year, I can confidently say that Cold Visions is the best album in Blade's entire discography. There's sort of a divide in Blade's career if you're to look at it as a whole, where the first half is sort of this dark, muddier trap music, whereas the second half is sort of this ethereal, spiritual, poppy fairycore music. And what I love about this album is this album masterfully bridges those two ideas and sounds. While in many ways bladee is going back to that dark, noisy, aggressive hip-hop sound that he sort of pioneered earlier in his career, he's updating it by working with the likes of Wake Up Filthy, where the whole album sort of feels like a cybernetic swamp. And while this is sort of a callback to his original sound, he sort of brings in these introspective, reflective, and spiritual lyrics that he's been sort of known for in the second half of his career. And what this adds up to is bladee with his most introspective lyrics, but most cutting-edge production. This whole album feels like bladee has this wretched hunger to sort of insert himself back into the game. A lot of the theme of this album is bladee coming to terms with he's getting older. A lot of his peers are much younger and he needs to feel competitive about that. But at the same time, he's more of an adult now. And this album just sort of sounds like this chaotic war going on in the self of bladee. Album sounds like it's being played out of a hearse with blown out speakers that's driving through the gates of Hades. This album sounds like a Roblox drive-by shooting. This album sounds like the voices in your head have unionized and they have decided that they wanted better pay or else they're burning the whole place down. bladee is yearning and begging into the void for any voice to answer him back. This album is earnest and anxious and sounds like bladee is at the gates of physics and reality itself, and he is begging for them to let him in. The Body and Disfig, Orchards of a Futile Heaven. This album sounds like an invocation of divine images that are perhaps too powerful for a man to comprehend. This is not the first time I have mentioned The Body on this list, because they are one of the most creative and unique acts in the music today. And this album that they have released sounds like an angel singing over lively war footage. The Body have teamed up with Disfig, and Disfig is a very talented Berlin DJ and experimental singer. And The Body, who are these alternative metal power electronic duo, and they've teamed up in this really unique way. If you look at a lot of interviews with The Body, they've always stated that they want to make pop music. And I think with this collaboration with Disfig, I think they got really close to that. While The Body's sound is super harsh and jarring, Disfig has some really beautiful ethereal vocals over that. And they've done a really good job of leaving space for her vocals for the beauty of that to shine through. And then they sort of build up on this album to these loud, aggressive, experimental moments. The Body creates these massive, harsh, noisy electronic soundscapes that Disfig sings over. And it's really just beautiful and inspiring. These tracks really build up and create tension in a really orchestral way. There's not a lot else like this in modern music, besides maybe Patoma by Ethel Cain or Lingua Ignatia's music. But this album creates a really beautiful, fascinating portrait. I get the same feeling listening to this album that I get when I see a John Martin painting, where in a sense it's apocalyptic and ancient and terrifying, but it's also beautiful. This sort of representation of divine female rage is something we don't get to see a lot of in a contemporary setting. The whole album is ancient and seraphic and sort of feels more like prophecy. This is personally my favorite album of the year. Boom, surprise, I do have one favorite. It's this one. Anyway, those are my top albums for 2024. I hope you guys have enjoyed this list. I certainly enjoyed making it and listening to all this music. If you enjoyed this content, give me a follow. My name is Karsten Kraning, signing off.